quiet time. Ain't going nowhere, so dry your eyes. Already lasted longer than fireflies.
Joining us live for our second night after New York Comic Con. We're so stoked. The OG Podcast Network has had us back. We've gone through 2 days of New York Comic Con, and we're...
Wait, it's only been 2 days?
Yeah, it feels like it's been a week.
Tell them
but
where we
it's,
at.
it's going well. It's going well. So we're here live from the Hackensack Meridian Health Stage 17, and we're joined...
You said the whole thing right.
I did. I was going to say hacky sack, but
there's a lot of pressure on that.
Hackensack.
I used to play hacky sack.
Hackensack.
Meridian.
So I'm John Menti, the host here at Fireside Chats. I'm also joined by my wonderful sidekicks. First, P Features.
Hello, Internet.
And then Mauer.
I was going to say beep you, but I don't feel like saying it today, so just
Say
what's
it.
going on?
No, say
Well,
it.
that's no, come on.
Say
I
it.
beep you, Menti.
That
was the driest.
There was like nothing to it. There was no.
Are you ready? I apologize for everyone's ears. Beep you!
That's much better. And we also have another host with us today. We're very lucky to have the incredibly talented Tony Powell.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. And you come on now. I'm sitting in
sorry.
next to
It's sandwich.
Sandwiches is with us.
sandwiches. Yeah, because everybody else had all these. I didn't have any of the shirts. I don't have a T-shirt. I don't have, I don't
give you
have
the
a
one off the back,
catchphrase.
but nobody
I
wants to see
didn't
that.
even know it was a catchphrase. I just figured, wow, okay, this is some comic book stuff I'm totally not aware of. But apparently,
I really just
it's
don't
a
like
thing
him.
you do. All right,
Yeah,
okay.
I don't
I
like
wasn't
him.
aware of that, so I'm gonna go with Sandwiches Powell, just because I need some sort of nickname too. It means nothing, but that's what I'm rolling with.
Well, today we're going to be talking about Luke Cage in detail.
Did you
let me
think-
tell.
did you-
Whoa!
I'm
I got
feeling
this.
the pressure.
I got this.
He needs
I
a
got
bigger
this.
intro than we do.
I got this.
Oh,
I got
yeah.
this. I'm setting this one up. Give me a moment.
So you want
So
to-
we're
this is the
talking about
wind-up.
Luke Cage,
Gotcha.
right?
All right.
Right, the hero of Harlem.
Yes.
But I figured if we're going to talk about the hero of Harlem, we should have the actual hero of Harlem.
I see what you did.
See where I'm going? See where I'm going here?
The original.
The icon, the legendary,
Or the
Kurtis
OG.
Blow. Oh!
Well,
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so stoked to have you here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, 125th Street.
Hey.
People and the concrete. The hottest spot to work and play. Main Street, Harlem, USA.
There it is. One more time.
That's our show for the night.
I
All right,
am,
everyone
I,
take
care.
I-
Good night, everybody.
I am here because I am a huge, avid supporter of and fan of Luke Cage. I remember, my gosh, 1974. I was 15 years old, but the hot thing during that time was comic books, man, and Marvel comic books.
absolutely.
As a matter of fact, I vowed to be an artist. I went to the High School of Music and Art for art, and I was trying to become not Stan Lee, but Gary Buscema. All right.
Okay.
Who was
All right.
the artist? This guy was incredible for Marvel Comics, right? Now, there was a competition, DC and Marvel Comics during those days. Of course, we know DC Comics with Batman and Superman.
Right.
But Marvel just had them beat all the way around with Spider-Man and the Hulk. And, of course, you got Iron Man. And they had this guy who had his office on 125th Street. And I live 10 blocks away from there, right? So I'm from 140th Street, actually, right? And Convent Avenue. And 125th Street is like 42nd Street to us up in Harlem, right? So
Okay.
we go down and we play. But it was famous, and that's where the Apollo is. So Luke Cage, to me, was like a homeboy.
Absolutely.
I felt like we grew up together,
Yeah.
And just his whole story of how he was, a crime fighter and the police hated him. Oh, it sounds familiar these days. On 125th Street. But, yeah, man, it was just those days, we're coming out of the civil rights movement with... I remember being around in 1968 when Martin Luther King was killed, and RFK, Robert Kennedy was killed, and Malcolm X, JFK, civil rights movement. It was a rough and tough time for America and those. But then came Alex Haley with that Roots.
Yeah.
76, yeah.
I don't know what year is that.
1976.
Wow.
I remember it.
I mean, and cats were just like, pro-black was the thing. You know, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. We were a people that were trying to get liberated and become equal to everyone else in this society. And New York being the melting pot that it is, equality and human rights was very, very important during that time. And Luke Cage just represented that for us, up in Harlem in New York City. So I'm glad to be here and represent that time.
That was
Nice.
I mean, we could end the show at that point.
Yeah, let's
that
just
was,
go.
That's good.
we could wrap up after there. But it is tradition on the show for those who might be watching or who listens to the show and might not be aware of who Luke Cage actually is. Right? So maybe you haven't seen the Netflix show, or maybe you don't read comics
Where you live under a rock.
or a rock. Who wants to give me my Luke Cage breakdown? I'm gonna put everybody on the spot.
On the spot,
Who's
the
gonna, who
breakdown?
wants to give me the breakdown on Luke Cage?
I think I'm looking at the experts right now because I can't top what he just
but
said.
see, now earlier, I took a little different take than Curtis earlier. When Luke, I was a kid, and same thing, reading Marvel comic books, and sometime it was my escape. And when Luke Cage came out initially, see, I didn't live I'm from Brooklyn, so I live on 125th Street. Okay. So when he came out initially, my take was, this is right on the end of like the blaxploitation films, like 74.
Right.
And so I said, even as a kid, I felt like I was being pandered to. I was like, they bring this brother out. He got the disco, shirt on, shirt all open down to his belly button, with the boots, jeans, and the tiara on his head and the afro. I was like, come on, man. And then, he was Luke Cage, and it was Power Man. And I thought to myself, I said, yeah, okay, it's fine. I'm glad y'all putting a black hero out there. I need to see myself. But why can't this guy, be? I mean, and this is the first time. And he was the first, I believe, black character to get his own title.
His solo series, yeah.
Solo series. But I just felt like, if you're gonna do that, then make him as big and as badass as the other big badasses in the Marvel universe. I didn't want him just to be the street dude. I wanted him to be, where when it went down, everybody said, "Where's Luke Cage? Where's Power Man?" So that was my initial take. Now, flash forward, after the New Avengers and after they kind of, after you started getting some black writers to kind of say, you know what, let's try to change this up. Let's make this a little bit different. And yes, we know he was framed, but why did he have to come from prison? That was my, all of these little things went through my brain. But now, that they've said, okay, you know what, let's reinvent him with the series, the Netflix series. What I love about it is that it is the most unapologetically black show on TV.
Yeah.
There was no bones about it. I mean, we saw the success of the Black Panther, but I think Luke Cage was the first of these Marvel projects or properties to say, you know what, it's okay to be unapologetically black. So that's my take on Luke Cage. As for his origin story, I'll let y'all take that on.
Oh, well,
So
go ahead.
the bulletproof hero for hire is probably the simplest way to break him down. He's a man of the people, for the people. His neighborhood is his kingdom, and he has the strength and durability to put the weight of what everyone's going through on his shoulders.
And he also did go toe-to-toe with Captain America. He did go toe-to-toe with Doctor Doom. When Marvel has a habit when they introduce a character that they have to run them through the gambit of characters. Right? They have to get all the big hitters at that time have to get their time with the new character.
Their initiation
right,
rites.
so to speak. So there were times where in Harlem you had Captain America and Luke Cage throwing each other through walls. Right, and that's especially during the time having Captain America and Luke Cage doing something like that was interesting. To say the least.
They did it. I give them credit. I mean, I'm not trying to take anything from Marvel. I give them a ton of credit because at that time, and as Curtis, eloquently said, you're talking about post, the backside of the civil rights movement, the end of blaxploitation. Actually, the birth stages, the nascent stages of the hip hop movement were all in that time, and they kind of slipped him into that. And so it was he came of age at the right time. I mean, and I think the thing about comic books is you read them as a kid and you kind of keep reading them, you grow up with them, even though these characters remain locked in time, pretty much the same age as when you first encountered them. you kind of grow up with them. So yeah, I mean, they did run him through the gamut. I just felt like, you know what, if it's only gonna be one with a limited series, only gonna be one with his own title, make him badass like Namor and them other cats. If you're gonna have him be
I would have
hard.
used Namor as the badass one.
Yeah, no, you can use Namor. That's perfectly fine.
You know why? Because Features likes Namor.
That's right. I do.
Namor's a player though, man. You can't hate on Namor. Namor is a player.
Yeah, you can't hate on Namor Maurer.
Until he got beat by Aquaman
Hey,
by a
come
whale
on.
being dropped on him.
Cut that out.
All right.
Okay.
Well,
He was the first hero to fly. Namor, little wings on his feet.
ankles.
that's right.
But-
think how
but-
strong those wings are. Though, if they can lift his body up out of the water. and
Thank you,
propel him
Tony.
to- I'm sorry. Yes,
Or how
I know
dainty
now
he
that you're
is.
really hating on Namor.
It's my
Because he
fault.
likes Aquaman.
When you guys
You like
finally
who?
got a chance to see the Luke Cage
Super
show,
Friends riding a jet ski Aquaman. Is
Yeah,
that what you're
that
talking
guy.
about?
Yeah.
Okay.
when
Talk
the
to
Luke
fish?
Cage show came out, I want to get off the fish talk. I want to get out of the ocean and back to Harlem.
Let's go back to Harlem. Okay, go ahead.
When the show came out, when that finally broke through, right? When we finally got the Netflix series, how did that feel compared to the comics, compared to growing up with Luke Cage, like translating him into the modern era?
Well, for me, it was more like, we have come of age because I was watching, the Superman. You remember Superman was the first do-over in the theater, in the film world. And then they started having a series of that, going to Batman came out. And then the Marvels started to hit it hard. And it was just incredible to see my lifelong heroes on the big screen, you know what I mean? And with these special effects that were, out of this world, it just seems like the comic book jumped out and just went on TV, It was awesome.
Well-
So when Luke Cage came, it was like, wow, here's my hero, and it's redone, and I get to see him again. I'm reliving my childhood all
Absolutely.
over again, and my special hero has now made it to the big screen. So I was honored and proud.
Now,
you know.
before we go any further, I do want to introduce one extra guest. There is one seat that's open, one microphone that is vacant. I'd like to introduce everybody to Shawn Martinbrough. Shawn Martinbrough, thank you for joining us.
What's going on, Sean?
Hey, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Shawn is the incredible artist of Luke Cage Noir, which is one of my actual favorite Luke Cage books.
Oh, wow. The check is in the mail, man.
Check in the mail.
Wait, I told him to say that.
Yeah, hey, whoa.
Post-dated out to say check for you.
All right, good.
It's on its way, too.
But
bono.
one of the things that when we were putting this panel together, I read an article that you did for BET about Luke Cage, and I thought that article was outstanding, and it spoke a lot to what we were hoping to bring to the table today. So right now, what we're talking about is the translation of Luke Cage from his origins to who he is now. So to what happened now that the Netflix era, and I believe your article was written in 2016.
Yeah.
So a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But it's still very true today, and everything that you wrote in that article was good. So if you don't mind, if you remember the article. But
Word for word.
yeah, if you could.
It was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Well, I think basically, what I was just trying to communicate was just the power and the importance of representation. And when you're growing up, when you're younger, you don't really notice things, and you don't notice how the world is being depicted around you until you get a little older, a little wiser, and you say, oh, wait a minute, why are there certain images portrayed more than others? And I just, and I always say that with Luke Cage, Luke Cage was created in the 70s during the sort of the blaxploitation era, and in his first incarnation, he had a big fro, a yellow silk shirt, a metal tiara, blue spandex.
Tony, you got it.
And he used to run around Harlem knocking out people and
He
saying
looks
"Sweet
fantastic,
Christmas."
though.
But but he used to run around Harlem and just knock people out saying "Sweet Christmas." And as a young impressionable kid, I bought it. But then as you get older, you're like, wait, what the hell? What is this? Yeah, Sweet Christmas. Yeah, I say that all the time around my son. Sweet Christmas. Yeah. So, but then as you get older, you start learning and you start seeing how certain stereotypes are put out. And I know that when I was invited by Marvel to work on Luke Cage Noir, they wanted to put a different spin on the character. And so they said, okay, we're going to, instead of having Luke Cage come up in the 1970s, we're going to set him up as coming up in the during the height of the Harlem Renaissance. And that was a very interesting opportunity for me to portray this character in a more sophisticated way. So, gone were the silk yellow shirt and the blue spandex, and I put him in a suit. And also a lot of times when black characters are depicted in comics, usually they have like one haircut. Or, usually it's either a fade or a baldy. And I said, let me give this guy some hair. And I looked around and I patterned him. I use a lot of reference from our artwork, and I patterned him after the classic black actor Paul Robeson.
Oh, wow.
And I used him as a model for the character. And that to me was just really just my way of putting my more adult, sophisticated spin on a classic black character. And I always say that art inspires art, as these two gentlemen know. And I know Cheo Hodari Coker, who the executive producer of the Netflix series, and he was a big fan of Luke Cage Noir. And he was like, hey, man, I love Luke Cage Noir, and it's a real big inspiration. I was just like, listen, Cheo, just find a way to put him in the suit. Okay. And he did it in season 1, and at the end of season 2, you see how he ends up, and he's in the suit. I was just like, yes.
And he's getting back into the suits, he said.
Yeah.
Now, your book was my first real intro to Luke Cage, more than even me looking and going at the character like, what are they doing to this guy? I mean, it seemed cheeseball even for me, but reading him in the noir, and then from that point on, Luke Cage was different. Right. That noir book kind of turned the page on the character and allowed it to be taken seriously and have some authenticity to it. And I think people needed to see something so totally different to kind of wipe that slate clean of the silk shirt wearing, tiara, Sweet Christmas saying Luke Cage, to get a serious take on a hero that needs to be there. And
I definitely have to credit the two writers and two white guys, Adam Glass and Mike Benson, a couple of Hollywood guys. They came in and wrote the story, and they really had a real respect for Luke Cage. But it also helps when you have people that are sort of from that experience adding the details that make it that much more authentic. Yeah. And they were totally open to whatever I wanted to do. And also, like, our editor, I have to give him a shout out, Axel Alonso, former editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. He totally was like, Shawn, you do whatever you want to do. And they were very supportive, and we had a really great team, putting that book together.
Well, something I want to ask the entire table is, going back to that article for a second, one of the big pieces that you were talking about was the image of Luke Cage, especially now in 2016. And the image of Luke Cage in that show is different, right? The bullet riddled hoodie, which is a very now an iconic look, right?
Well, it's making, to me, it always makes a cultural statement. And what I love about it, and you're talking about, here's where I think Luke Cage is truly badass.
He scares the police to death. Because here's a black man that you cannot shoot. And if you do shoot, there will be consequences. And so that bullet-riddled hoodie has so many different layers to it, so many different, sub-themes and subliminal shots to the dome every time you see it. I'm like, oh, okay, great. I'm glad they're doing that. And to Shawn's point, I'm so glad that people of color had some input into this character, because I gave Marvel credit for introducing the character in 1974. The problem was there weren't black artists to help shepherd that character forward and through. And so, as you said, when you read it as a kid, and once your sophistication level goes beyond the bang and the boom and the pow, and you start to think about the images you're seeing, it's important to have somebody that can shepherd that image.
Well, what's interesting? Like, I get asked this question a lot, where people are like, "Oh, what do you think about? Do you feel like what do you think about the lack of black artists and artists of color working in comics?" And I'm like, well, there've always been black artists and people of color working in comics. It's just that comic books back in the day was a faceless medium. Like, you didn't know, unless you had a very ethnic sounding name, you didn't know who was drawing what. And so there've always been black folks that have drawn the comics. Writers, not so much.
Right.
And we all know that writing is really, that's
the
where a
story.
lot of the story.
Yeah.
And so you can have a lot of talented black artists drawing a book, but if there's no editor saying, hey, let's do a Luke Cage book, and let's get a writer who's excited to do the material, then you won't get it.
Right.
And then they'll just go on and work on other characters.
Kurtis, when you think of Luke Cage, especially the bullet riddled hoodie, the look, and then you think of like the success around something like Black Panther, right? Do you feel that the look of Harlem and the American 2016 to 2018 look should be as celebrated as Black Panther became?
Sure, definitely. I think after watching the Netflix show, I feel sort of like, why isn't Luke Cage in Infinity Wars? You know what I mean?
That's
the
studios,
Avengers. When is that going to happen? Or one of those Captain America movie. The dude is right over in Brooklyn. You know what I mean? Why can't he just drive up to Harlem? And
He was
meet
getting
Luke
coffee.
Cage, like the comic book.
Luke
You
Cage
know?
don't drink coffee.
So I think there's potential for more to come.
Absolutely. Michael Coulter actually was just talking about the potential of more crossovers in the future, which there's for anybody unaware, this is something that we've talked about on our show all the time, which is the urge and the want for the Netflix properties or the TV show properties to cross over with the movies, right? We all want to see that.
Right.
Part of me though thinks that the Netflix properties, because it's long form storytelling versus the movies. Yeah, you can have sequential movies, or you can have, again, we're doing, Infinity Wars 1 and 2, and so you'll talk about 4 hours. But if you talk about the Netflix series of Luke Cage or Daredevil, you're talking about 10 episodes of an hour each. So you're talking about 10 hours versus 4 hours, and I think you get a chance to really, really have some nice story arcs, almost comic book like in the sense that each story leads to the next, and so it's like reading a comic book series or a limited comic book series on Netflix. And while I agree, I'd like to see maybe some Luke Cage on the big screen. I really do dig the fact that it's in my pocket, that Luke Cage is available to me on demand when I want to see it, and I can watch it. I can watch it, sequentially. I can watch it, binge watch 4 or 5 episodes, and then put it away, and then save myself about 4 or 5 episodes when I really need to see something I want to see. Versus a movie. Once you see the movie, it's 2 hours and it's done, and that's that.
I think we would lose Luke Cage if we put him in the MCU. On Netflix, they have the power to write him and portray him the way they want. The second that character crosses over into the movies in the MCU, it's no longer about Luke Cage.
Right.
It's about the big picture and the big storyline and the big thing they're doing, and the characters get kind of shuffled to the side. So I don't know if all the things that we're lauding over the show for would transfer over as well.
Do you think Aquaman is going to have his solo movie?
Oh, yeah, it's on its
Yeah,
way.
it's done.
Was it today, the second trailer
I
released?
thought I saw one.
New trailer dropped today.
New
and it's
trailer dropped
beautiful.
today.
I was totally in the convention all day, so it looks good.
It looks real
See,
good.
I always thought that Aquaman was going to be the sleeper, and just because of
I would get up and hug you if I could.
long distance.
Stay
But
asleep.
because of James Wan.
Yes.
James Wan.
Absolutely.
James Wan
Not
has
'cause
got
of
the
Aquaman.
skills. Not because of Aquaman, because you know what I mean. But I think Aquaman
he
is
is good.
he's a good character. I think he's a good character that's been kind of the butt of jokes.
Uh-huh.
But I think that I always thought that James Wan is like the guy who's a good director. He's got a vision, and I think the fact that his film properties have done so well, he's got the power and the clout to kind of do what he wants. So if that sucks, I'll be very surprised.
But do you guys, you think if Luke Cage got into the MCU, they would portray him the same way they are in the Netflix show, or do you think he'd lose some of that edge?
I think they would be foolish to not bring the character whole to the MCU. But I tend to agree with you. I think that bringing him to the MCU might damage the branding that is. And again, as I said, almost like the comic book, Luke Cage is niche reading. It's appointment reading. It's not something, I'm not sure that I would want to see him in an MCU film unless they really have a compelling reasons. Now, if they want to bring him into a new Avengers,
That's what I was just going to get to.
MCU film,
You're not a new Avengers fan?
See, even though I've been working in the industry since 1992, I haven't kept up with continuity. So my Avengers knowledge base is stopped back in the 90s. So I don't know Luke
We're
Cage
sorry.
being in the Avengers. I don't, but then again, then Marvel got into the silly phase with like the Clone Wars and the clone, all that, the clone saga and all that stuff. So I kind of
This is later.
Yeah, I know we're getting really geeky for everybody.
This is later.
But I just never saw Luke Cage. I never actually read the books where he was part of the Avengers. But I do think that the reason why you don't see a crossover between the TV shows and the movies because it's politics.
It is
and
absolutely
they're different divisions that are doing their different things. Listen, I think you give Kevin Feige Luke Cage, I think you're going to get a badass Luke Cage. I don't think it's going to be bad. And actually, Marvel really surprised me because I'm a big Marvel guy. I'm not one of the guys that says, "Oh, Marvel does everything great and DC sucks." But it's kind of the fact. But it's just come on. It's just this is the way the
facts.
movies have come on.
Pounded out.
It's
I
just
like that. I
facts.
agree.
Except for Wonder Woman, that was cool.
The views of
there you
Shawn
go.
Martinbrough do not reflect any Fireside Chats.
Are you going to make a case for Justice League?
No, he's not. He's not.
Don't do this. Don't do this.
Come on.
Put your
Don't
hand
do
down.
this, Sean. Please don't do this.
Mal, you can't possibly make a case for Justice League.
You're right.
This is a rabbit hole,
Superman was
gentlemen.
dope in Justice League. We got Superman the way that Superman was meant to be portrayed since we have seen him as Christopher Reeves, and that is the saving grace. It was a fun comic book movie that played out like a
Don't say
comic
that.
book.
Don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say
Now,
that. Don't say
The
that.
views of Stephen Maurer.
The
do not-
Justice League, the Justice League needs Superman. Superman does not need the Justice League. So him coming in and whooping ass, that's what we needed.
Now, I want to go
do
back to
this.
Luke Cage for a second
Okay.
because
Yeah, we're-
remember that Luke Cage also ran the Avengers for a while. So there was the
Really?
Mighty
Yeah, he
Avengers.
did.
where Luke
He was-
Cage
he was the
led
head.
the Avengers.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking
Okay.
is you can take Luke Cage and okay, let's talk about the Netflix series leading up into that. Like if this were a thing, if all of a sudden we brought Luke Cage into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Right now we've got Luke Cage going down a very dark path. Right in season 2, the end. Spoiler alert! I don't want to say anything too much, but the end of season 2 has a kind of it's questionable, right? So we're seeing almost like the birth of a redemption story. I would say from Luke Cage, probably season 3, something around those lines. But that could catapult him into a degree of A-list hero that I think he rightfully deserves to be. Right? He could be that powerhouse that we would get with New Avengers. Now that the Marvel Cinematic Universe now has the X-Men, you could have Wolverine, Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
you have
You-
Luke
now you're talking
Cage,
about,
Cap, Iron Man,
Captain America, yep,
and then
yep.
go into a Mighty Avengers story led by Luke Cage.
So
And then we might get Sentry.
So now you're getting
Nah,
way too
you're going
nerdy
too
for
far.
everybody.
You're going
We're
too
not
far.
going into Century.
No.
Maurer.
I mean, I was thinking, I was waiting for Luke Cage, and they shocked me with the Black Panther.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought Luke Cage was coming first
Yeah.
before Black Panther. I mean, wasn't he more famous back
Black
in the day?
Panther is kind of like Iron Man when they first rolled him out. They could do more with him and not have
Because he had a mask
backlash.
and everything on, and he
and ju-
wasn't really a black character, but he just had a black name, Black Panther.
More freedom of the story. I think a lot more people knew Luke Cage.
Right.
So when you're doing a character like Black Panther, where people knew of him but didn't quite know the mythos of him, when you're putting that on film, you kind of have the room to go. Let's push this here, push that there. Where that's what they wanted to do with that. I would have liked to see Luke Cage as a film too.
That's what I was going back to in the beginning when I was talking about Black Panther, the success of Black Panther and the success of Luke Cage. Right. Because Black Panther, Wakanda forever all day, but doesn't change the fact that that is not necessarily American, right? Where you have Luke Cage, on the other hand, who is
New York
absolutely
going
speaks
hard,
the
yeah.
American story.
Right.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So it's interesting to watch the growth and the propelling of one character, but the Netflix one isn't getting the deserve I believe it does, that it needs. Because even when you look at the series themselves, I wouldn't put Luke Cage up against Daredevil. I think Daredevil as a show is a more intriguing show because it's about Daredevil, less about the music behind it, and there's so much more that goes into Luke Cage as a show besides the story, which kind of hurts the story in my opinion.
What about ratings? How is his ratings doing?
So
over
that's
Netflix?
the thing with Netflix.
Yeah, they don't.
They don't really
There
show
aren't
ratings.
ratings. They say, "Hey, these shows are doing great. Believe us." Ding.
Yeah, I think they're more subscriber based.
Again, I think that fans, it's like a buffet. I mean, if you go to a buffet and there's Luke Cage and there's Daredevil and there's Iron Fist and then there's the Marvel Cinematic Universe on the other side of the table, you can take a little something from each and still appreciate each thing that you take.
Absolutely.
So I do, and I don't own it, but I do feel kind of protective of this character in the way that it's being done. I think the only thing that they almost lost me last season with the dab. I mean, he dabbed in episode 2.
In Luke Cage?
Yeah.
Shawn dabbed.
They had Superman dab on Supergirl. Like the dab died.
Yeah.
The dab,
you know,
once
I
Superman's
know.
dabbing, it's dead. That's out.
So,
Yeah.
so that right there, and I was watching it, and I'm saying that this is a critical point. Because you hit the pause button, so you can see how much time is left in the episode and how many more episodes you have ahead of you.
Oh, and I'm remembering what you're talking about now. Okay.
Yeah,
It was really bad.
Some sporting event.
There's some corny stuff. There's some corny
Yeah.
stuff.
That's the point where the timeline splits.
Yeah. So they almost lost me season 2, but I said, I'm gonna push through it and try to forget what I saw. Having said that, I still like what they're doing with that character, and I still think that in the long form way that they can tell his story, I think it does more for that character than, say, if they put him in a movie that you saw once every 2 years or once every 3 years, and then you'd get to the same point that we are now with Chris Evans, where these guys are aging out of these roles. So I kind of like the idea that they can shoot 10 episodes in a year and then bring us back in another year or so and give us another 10 episodes. And so when you think about it, after 3 years, you'll have 30 episodes of Luke Cage. You may only have two movies in 3 years.
Sean and Curtis, you guys are cracking me up because I'm watching your faces as everything that everybody says. You both are going.
Well, I'm just curious to hear what Curtis thinks about all this Marvel movie stuff and like characters like the Black Panther and Luke Cage.
Hey,
were you a comic fan growing
I
up?
just said it before you got here.
Okay.
I'm big time comic book fan from the 70s.
Wow.
74, I was 15, and that's all I did was try to draw like Stan Lee and
What?
Buscema.
Wow, so you so you draw?
I went to music and art.
I went to music and art too.
Did you?
I graduated. I was class of God.
Hey, dude, you want to do that?
Is it like the
No,
reunion?
what class of
How many
89,
hands?
It's
class
a
of
reunion
89.
show.
89.
No, I'm class of 70 something.
Okay, so you were like the original building. Come on, listen. Be proud for every year you're alive on this planet. Be proud. There.
Yes,
do you rap,
yes,
Sean?
No.
Okay.
Do not rap.
He got your drawing, and you got his rapping.
Well, he got the drawing and the rapping because I can't rap.
for a midterm test in art, I drew. It was a cover of Conan. It was a Conan cover, and he was on this big rock, and he had this beautiful girl with him, like with long hair, and she had very nothing on, like a bathing suit or something. And he had his axe in his hand about to chop a big alligator that jumped up on the rock from the ocean. And I drew that and got an A.
Nice.
Did you keep it up or like you just?
I had every Conan book from 1 to 20, every one.
Yeah, he's coming back.
Yeah.
Marvel's got a new Conan book coming out.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I want to stick on the arts there and the music we touched on a little bit in Luke Cage. We had Esperanza Spalding. We had Gary Clark Jr., Wu-Tang. We've had
Stephen Marley.
KRS-One, Jadakiss.
The music on there is almost like its own show with Luke Cage.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think when you first saw that first trailer, the first episode, and that soundtrack hit?
No, it was amazing. It was amazing to me because I'm an avid fan of those superhero movies, and I remember in Shame every superhero needs a theme song, theme song music, right? And so Wu-Tang is incredible. Just the stuff they have been doing on soundtracks and with the Kill Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, he did a great job.
Yeah.
That was RZA, right?
Yes.
Right? Incredible. So, I mean, it was right there, being 125th Street, Luke Cage, hip-hop. It seemed real, It just added that same flavor to make it more real.
So, Curtis, what borough did you? What borough?
Harlem.
You're Harlem. Okay, you're
yeah.
Harlem native. Okay,
Yes.
and
I'm from Brooklyn.
Oh, so
What is that about?
I'm from the Bronx. I'm from the Bronx. You know how that goes.
I'm sorry for you. I feel I'm sorry.
Brooklyn's number one
My
now.
grandmother
I'm
lives
telling
in
you.
Brooklyn, so
Somebody get the
I'm-
ref.
for everyone who's out of state, usually like New Yorkers usually know their borough and one other borough, and
That's it. I mean, yeah, because people, nobody travels from Brooklyn to the Bronx on purpose.
Oh, stop
On purpose.
Stop it!
That's true. Even people in Harlem, you can just go across the bridge. They say, nah, you know what?
Sean, you kind of started this.
I started. I was
Listen,
fine, and you just
Bronx,
Let's
the
just sit back.
Bronx, the Bronx. You know, the Bronx. But it's interesting though. So it's curious. I'm just curious, like being like a Harlem native and seeing Harlem depicted on the screen or on Luke Cage. I mean, I'm sure that was really cool for you to just see like your own neighborhood.
It was everything for me because, like I said, you know, I'm coming, 15 years old, coming out of the civil rights movement, Alex Haley and Roots and that whole big thing. I mean, all the kids during that time, we were all, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. We were coming out of the civil rights movement and we were walking around with our heads up high saying we are equal to everyone that's out there on this planet. And so Luke Cage just represented that for us. Here's our superhero. He's on 125th Street too, and so we just felt like he was ours. He was our homeboy. He was our hero.
That's
for real.
Wow.
For real.
My mom taught. She's a teacher. She taught public school for like 30-something years, and she taught on 100. She taught at PS 123 on 140th Street.
Oh, okay.
What was that? Not Adam Clayton, but that's Frederick Douglass Boulevard. And so I just.
My niece went there.
Oh, get out.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's that small New York world we have right here. Yeah.
Tony, it's okay. You come over here.
no, you come on, Leah.
I like
except
Brooklyn.
in Philly.
Yeah.
140th and Convent.
I went to, actually, this is
It's a lot of
interesting.
numbers.
I went to City College one time.
Hey, I went to City College too.
That was right
That's
there.
right.
But there was a nonprofit place called the Children's Art Carnival on Hamilton Terrace, and that's actually where I really got a lot of that's where I got my two mentors from, because when I was going to LaGuardia, which is like the new version of music and art, after both schools. So for anyone who doesn't know, you had Performing Arts High School, and then you had Music and Art, and then I think Performing Arts, they burned down. And then they merged the two schools into a new school that housed all of the art, music, dance, drama,
The Fame High
vocals.
School.
Yeah, all they
And
said.
they moved downtown.
And they moved that right. And they were in a brand new building at the time. It was like $1 million building, which is a big deal back in the '80s, right across from Lincoln Center.
Right.
And that's where I went. But then I met a buddy of mine who was a fellow art major, and he was like, "Hey, I take a really cool cartooning class for free. It's up in Harlem on the weekends. It's at this place called the Children's Art Carnival." And it was like a nonprofit organization where they would have black professionals come in and teach for free. So you could take a cartooning class, an illustration class, a video class, and a photography class. And that's actually where I met my two mentors. And one's name was Gil Ashby and Michael Davis. And I always say that they gave me my yin and yang perspectives in terms of being an artist, because Gil was the purist. He was like, you have to learn how to draw, you have to learn how to do anatomy, perspective. Davis was like, it's a business. It's a business. It's a hustle. And that's something that art schools never teach you.
Right.
They never teach you the business aspect of it. And so, so it's interesting. So whenever, I would, and so my mom, so we lived in New Rochelle, and to go to LaGuardia, you had to be a New York City resident.
Right.
And we lived in New Rochelle in Westchester, which is outside of the city. So like many people, we would use like my grandmother's address. And I would catch a ride down with my mom because she taught school on 140th Street in Harlem.
Right.
So she would drive me to LaGuardia, drop me off, and then she would go to school. And then she'd pick me up. And then as I got a little older, I was like, Mom, I'll take the train home, because you don't want your mom picking you up. But then on the weekends, I would take the Metro North train to the Children's Art Carnival in Harlem on Hamilton Terrace, which is right around the corner from Convent.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Right
yeah.
there.
What's the statute of limitations on breaking the district?
Ah,
rules?
please. That's all. I'm sure people are doing it now.
You asked about the music question. I when I first saw them doing it, and having live, real artists, singing in the club, it reminded me of a show, I guess in the '90s, New York Undercover.
Right.
Yeah. They would go to the club, right, and they would have up and coming artists or artists who were established, and they would sing, sing as part of the show. So when I saw that on Luke Cage, I said, "Wow, that's a really nice touch." I thought that was a really cool idea. I mean, music. I guess tomorrow we'll discuss it, but music is, is the soundtrack of our lives, and when you can associate something musically with something that you like in another part of your brain, it works.
Yeah, I think in that first episode they said Raphael Sadiq's name like 70 times.
Yeah.
And on stage we got Raphael.
They call him Sadiq a few times.
It's like, oh, we get it, but they wanted to set that tone.
Right.
Yeah.
That this isn't just a show about a comic superhero. This isn't just a show about Harlem. This is a show about music and culture and people.
And you know what's really cool because we're up here like teasing each other with the whole Brooklyn Bronx thing, and Harlem, but the storyline for Luke Cage 2 was Brooklyn
Yeah.
and Harlem. The whole Bushmaster thing. I mean, I was walking around my house with that accent, you know, blah, 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 you know.
Stokes.
You know, I mean, but that was also really interesting how they were just how they kept bouncing back and forth between Brooklyn and.
But it was funny for me watching it because you know when he went to, I was like, you know, he's acting like he's traveling to a foreign.
Some people act like that.
He's from Harlem. You're going right downtown. What's the problem is, man?
There are some people that
Like he
live
had a
in.
passport to get on the subway. What are you talking
Come on,
about?
because you know there are people that live in the borough of Manhattan, the island of Manhattan,
That never leave.
that would never leave the Lower East Side to go to the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side. You would think that they were traveling across state lines.
No, it's fact.
That's how New York is.
Now, I would like to pose to you, gentlemen, that because we talked about the comparison of Black Panther and Luke Cage, that one may seemingly be bigger than the other, and I just had a thought that that's not so much the case, and one of the differences between the two is that Luke Cage being a more close to home like guy, and it's a more grounded character, and like Mauro, you were saying earlier, it's much more grounded in our culture all across the board.
Right.
So it's what we relate to, even though you said you weren't too fond of how he came out, but that was that
I
made
wasn't
him
fond of the portrayal. I
Right.
wasn't fond of the idea, but you're right though. I mean,
But-
in terms of the way he's portrayed now, absolutely, he
Right.
is. It's Harlem, USA. You know, it's one word. It's Harlem, USA. It's when you see him going to Pops the barbershop.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the barbershop is a place that we all relate to. I mean, my podcast, that was the basis of my idea. It was just to, have barbershop conversations. It's something we relate to culturally. So they incorporated that. The fact that he wanted to make sure that he was Harlem's protector. And when you think about Harlem in terms of black culture, it is the capital of the of American black world.
right.
It is a touchstone for all of us. You know, whether it doesn't matter if you're from Philly. Somebody says Harlem, it right away
It rings.
transports you to some place. So yeah, I agree with that. I think that in terms of relatable characters, I don't know what it's like to live in Wakanda.
Exactly.
I mean Wakanda and part of the Wakanda ideal is fanciful to me. I sound horrible. I relate more to Killmonger than I do to T'Challa.
Well, now, speaking of that,
too.
they had to throw Killmonger the way they wrote Killmonger for the movie. That was American culture being brought into Wakanda, so that made Black Panther a little bit more grounded.
But I'm going to push back though with the things that you're saying that you can't sort of relate to Wakanda and like what you saw, because I think that there are universal things for especially the black family. Come on, the way he was teasing back and forth with his sister.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the whole thing with God, I'm blanking on her, Denai Guerrera's character. Where she had the wig.
Yeah.
Come on, I mean that's a universal thing. Like there's certain touches there that are just universal no matter where they are, and I think that was just sort of a great sort of depiction of the black experience. And I think what made the movie so brilliant is that they just showed it in different. They showed the differences, the cultural differences, but also the commonalities.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, see,
But
to me-
and then the real thing was the fact that they portrayed the African man as one with a brain
Right.
and technology.
Absolutely.
And they were on the upper echelon and level of this technology and had something to offer the rest of the world, which is
Right.
totally unheard of from an African.
Yeah.
well, to
And
me,
so that broke a lot of the molds and let people know, maybe this Darwin theory is not true. You know what I mean? And we all have a brain. I mean, I remember Timbuktu was the center of education. Everybody had to go there to learn. So it's like this message sort of like just jumped out at the world to let you know, hey, there's a possibility that these guys are all right.
I pose this question: Is Wakanda aspirational for us, or or as opposed to Luke Cage's, which is more real?
I think both. I mean, because the thing about what I thought was so brilliant about Black Panther is that there are people that can identify with the Wakanda's perspective of, listen, we don't want to deal with the outside world. We don't want to bring their problems into our house and have that corrupt us. That's something that, people can really identify with.
Right.
Because if you have this really great society that's doing really well, do you really want to possibly contaminate it with outside nonsense? I get that. But I think that what is aspirational about it is just the fact that, you could work together amongst people that look like you. Which bucks the trend of what people of color have been sort of taught, which is you can't trust each other, divide and conquer, and that to me is the most aspirational thing about it. Seeing sort of black characters working together, for a common good. Right. And I think that what made that movie so great and what made it so grounded is that you had these really fantastic things like vibranium, flying hovercrafts, but that scene where you first see them walking down the streets of Wakanda, and there's like something sizzling on like the hibachi stove, and the guy just sort of hanging around, like that could be on 125th Street, or the Village, or the Lower East Side. So I'm like, okay, when have you ever seen that in any other kind of Marvel movie or sci-fi type film?
But I think if Luke Cage would start to take a piece of that book and deal with some technology and just education or practical study, logic, and add that to the show, that might take him to that next level that we need.
Let me pose one last question, because we got to start wrapping up soon, but I want to pose one last question. Where would you like to see Luke Cage go? What would you personally like to see next for Luke Cage?
That's what I'm talking about. Technology. Scientists, use, he has a brute strength, he's a superhero. Bullets they bounce off of him.
Well, your
but
question
now,
because what can you change on Luke Cage and not lose Luke Cage?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't
logic. He'll just be smarter. I mean, he's.
But I think he
he can't die.
He's a pretty evolved.
He's about
human
150, right?
No.
Well, if you were 16 and carry the one,
I think with Luke Cage, in terms of, are you asking the question in terms of the comic book or series or just as a character in general? How would
I would say
I think he means the character in general.
I'd say in general. Like, what do you think next? Because obviously we can speculate on what the next story arc would be.
me,
in the
it's the
comic
brain.
books, he's a father. In the comic books, he's a father.
Right.
He's a parent, and so at some point he will have to. He has a daughter. He'll have to raise that daughter, and I don't want to get political, but he's gonna have to raise that daughter in a world that's post Me Too. He's gonna have to raise that child.
Interesting.
To be self-actualized, and the child's mom is also an enhanced human.
Right.
So I wonder how he's gonna balance. I mean, would you want to go ring Luke Cage's doorbell to date his daughter?
No.
So that's
Everybody just
something to
looked
think
away.
about. Exactly. So that's what you want to see, because again, I think that the highest level of black man is to be black father, and to raise the next either black son or black daughter, black man, black woman. So that's his task now. That's his job. And how does he balance that and still be the hero for hire? That's something I'd like to see.
I like that.
see, on that note,
I finished it.
I think it's time for Menti to do that thing.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, first, before we do that, Kurtis Blow, one more time, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my
thank you
pleasure.
so much. Shawn Martinbrough, also, thank you so much for coming down. Tony Powell, I got 2 more days with you.
Sandwiches.
I got 2 more days with you.
Sandwiches.
Because everybody
We
loves
have
sandwiches.
Can we get some
I
sandwiches?
think we do. That's a
We'll
thumbs
talk
up.
about
We
it.
got a
We'll
thumbs
talk
up on
about
that.
it
later, yeah.
But sandwich.
That's how they pay me.
Again, from the Hackensack Meridian Health Stage 17, this is night 2 of Con After Dark. I want to thank everybody who was in the stream. I want to thank everybody for watching. Again, our guests, thank you so much for showing up. Once again, I'm Menti from Fireside Chats.
I'm Mr. Maurer.
And Features.
Don't forget to check out our show and Powell to the People on
Powell
the
to the People on OG Podcast. There you go.
And Shawn, where can we find you?
You can find me on social media or my website, ShawnMartinbrough.com, or you can check out my art instruction book, the Art and How to Draw Noir Comics, the Art and Technique of Visual Storytelling. which just kind of gives you an insight in terms of how I apply my approach to telling a story.
And Kurtis, what's next?
And for me, I am working on a project called the Universal Hip Hop Museum. Up in the Bronx. Up in the Bronx. We open our doors in 2022. We start construction next year, 2019, in the Bronx Point section, 3 blocks south of Yankee Stadium.
Wow.
Prime real estate there.
Yes, yes.
We'll
So
be
it's,
there.
It's a real brick and mortar location for the history of hip hop and present hip hop and the future hip hop.
But more importantly, what happened to those Conan drawings? Where are those Conan?
Oh my gosh. My mom has them.
Blame it on the mom. Blame it on the
Yeah,
mom.
she has them somewhere.
You gotta sign them, man.
You gotta
somewhere.
They're going in the museum.
you gotta take a picture of those and put them on
Kurtis
Snapchat or
Blow
something.
drawn
So check out
Conan.
uhhm.org. That's the website.
UHHM.org.
uhhm.org.
All right.
Nice.
And since we're throwing out acronyms, also check out the OG Podcast Network, the OGPodcastNetwork.com. And that's going to do it for Con After Dark.
Night 2.
And we're going to go ahead and do our little poses for a little while.
3-second pose.
3 seconds.
3-second poses.
Come on, ready?
First off, welcome to Fireside. We're turning on the books the entire time. Ain't going nowhere, so dry your eyes. Already lasted longer than fireflies. Stay tuned, Mitch's got the